Scotland, although the wind's a lot lighter here today compared to yesterday. The winds will pick up in the southwest later today, though, and we'll see a few more showers during this evening. Could be quite heavy as well. Of course, southwest England initially, but spreading into parts of Wales as we go through the night. Some bright colours there. Could see some intense downpours and the possibility of a rumble of two of thunder as well. Away from that, much of northern England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, dry and clear, and again a bit chilly. And again, a few fog patches forming, but generally a cloudier day to come tomorrow, certainly across the south. A band of showery rain drifting slowly northwards. Quite a wet morning across parts of the Midlands. That rain spreading into North Wales, eventually Northern Ireland, and eventually into parts of Northern England too. Further south, well, we'll see quite a lot of cloud, one or two showers. Much of Scotland, Northern England looking dry and bright again. With fairly light winds, not feeling too bad with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. Low pressure continues to throw bands of showers northwards through this week, but all the time with the air coming from the south, it'll be quite warm.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
A beleaguered Prime Minister who insists she will lead her party into the next election. A party who doesn't quite believe her but doesn't know what to do next. A Prime Minister who's been meeting colleagues, both from the left and the right of her party, hosting receptions for her cabinet. What on earth is next? And does she even have 2 weeks to get that medium-term fiscal plan through? We'll explore how the Prime Minister can handle what's to come after the headlines.
Thanks, Tom. A very good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Liz Truss is meeting her cabinet this morning after apologising for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. She's hoping the admission that she went, quote, too far, too fast, will pacify the party. The Prime Minister says she's still committed to growing the economy and has vowed to lead the Tories into the next general election. Well, it's after the Chancellor reversed the majority of the mini-budget published by his predecessor. The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, says the Conservatives should now get on with delivering for the country.
Whilst nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted, the reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far, too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m. in January and February next year. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit, while he was outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe to meet demand. Climate protesters caused traffic disruption this morning, blocking a main road into West London during rush hour. It was around 30 Just Stop Oil activists who sat on the A4 near Barons Court tube station, blocking both carriageways. Police have now removed the campaigners after some of them glued themselves to the tarmac. Daniel Craig is going to receive the same honour held by his character, James Bond. The 007 actor will be made a Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George for his services to film and theatre. He's starred in the last 5 Bond films, including Casino Royale, playing Ian Fleming's iconic title role. Well, the Princess Royal will award the honour at a ceremony at Windsor Castle later this morning. You're up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, today let's firstly recap yesterday, which concluded with the Prime Minister Liz Truss last night apologising for how she handled the last 3 weeks.
What I'm focused on is delivering for the British public. Now, I recognise we have made mistakes. I'm sorry for those mistakes, but I've fixed the mistakes. I've appointed a new Chancellor. We have restored economic stability and fiscal discipline. And what I now want to do is go on and deliver for the public. We were elected on the 2019 manifesto. I'm determined to deliver on that. Levelling up, securing investment into all parts of our country, getting roads built, getting opportunities right across the nation. And that's what I'm thinking about and that's what I'm focused on.
And the newly appointed Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, first in a statement to markets and later in a statement to the House of Commons, reversed all but 3 tax cuts from his predecessor's mini-budget.
We will reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not started parliamentary legislation.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer tabled an urgent question to the Prime Minister. But it was the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, who was sent to reply instead. And bizarrely, Mordaunt confirmed to all those wondering that the Prime Minister was not, in fact, hiding under a desk.
And all we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away.
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady.
We understand that the Prime Minister was in an important meeting. But behind closed doors yesterday, the Prime Minister met with Sir Graham Brady, addressed the One Nation caucus of Tory MPs and hosted an alcohol-free reception for her cabinet in Downing Street. This morning, as usual, she's chairing cabinet, of course, but this evening she's to address the European Research Group of Conservative Party MPs as well. A busy diary of meeting colleagues is never the mark of a Prime Minister who feels assured in their position. Well, let's discuss just how the Prime Minister's position is assured or otherwise with Kevin Schofield, the political editor at the Huffington Post. Kevin, thank you for joining us this morning. The Prime Minister is meeting with many, many colleagues yesterday, today and no doubt tomorrow as well. What does this say about her position?
I think it shows that she is fighting for her political life, Tom. Quite clearly, as you've just said, it's not a good sign when the Prime Minister is having to take time away from important matters of state to basically shore up her position with her own MPs. Her career right now, her political career, is hanging by a thread. I've just seen another opinion poll from YouGov this morning, which shows that her personal approval ratings are now -70, which is the worst of any political leader that they have ever recorded. So I think that gives an idea of how dangerous things are for the Prime Minister right now. She is effectively in office, but not in power. Her whole economic strategy, the ideas, the policies that she fought and won the Tory leadership campaign on have turned to dust. She's had to bring in Jeremy Hunt to become Chancellor just 3 weeks after Kwasi Kwarteng was appointed Chancellor. So, it's not looking good, to put it mildly. Now, Hunt's appointment may well have bought her a little bit of time, which she's now using to try and, as I say, shore up her position. But I think one more gaffe or one more mistake, and I think it really will be game over.
Yet, what some economists would say is that the tax cuts were a relatively minor element of the overall growth plan, that the most significant element of the growth plan would be these up to 8 pieces of supply-side reform, reforming the planning system, reforming childcare, even migration, all of these different areas, which were expected to be rolled out this week and next in the run-up to the 31st. Will she now get a chance to push forward that agenda that we did understand to be quite ambitious of supply-side reform boosting growth? Does that become all the more important now that the tax cuts have been junked?
It does become more important, you're right, because, the tax cuts, which Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Chancellor, had said would be the bedrock, effectively, of boosting growth, they've now gone. So it's all on the supply side reforms. Now, as you say, we were expecting to see most, if not all of them, before the end of the month. I don't think that's going to happen now. And the problem she's got is that politically she's so badly damaged. Getting all of these reforms through Parliament is going to rely very heavily on her standing within the Conservative Party and persuading her MPs to vote for them. Now, there's no guarantee that that would happen. And if it gets to the stage where the Prime Minister can't get her policy platform through the Commons, then I think that really would be the end of the road for her. So, everything now is basically out of her hands. She's made such a mess of the first few weeks of being Prime Minister. She's burnt through any political goodwill that she had, that really, as I say, any gaffe or mistake or problem that she encounters now, I don't see how she recovers from it. So it's just looking very, very difficult for her. And the other thing that she's got in her favour, of course, is that her opponents can't agree on what comes next. They might know how to get rid of her, but they can't agree on how her successor should be elected and indeed who that successor should be.
Yes, let's dive into the mechanics of that now, because there is perhaps a burgeoning consensus, and perhaps I might be being too bold here to say that MPs will probably give her the next 2 weeks. We probably will get to the 31st. Jeremy Hunt probably will announce that medium-term fiscal statement. Reportedly, that's what Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, believes would be right. But after that, it's possible the 1922 committee could change their rules to allow a leadership election. It's possible there could be resignations. What mechanism do you expect Conservative MPs might use to try and dislodge her?
I think it could be very similar to the way that they got rid of Boris Johnson. So if you remember, Boris Johnson actually survived a vote of confidence, but then just a few weeks later was forced to resign because effectively it was made clear to Graham Brady that he had lost the support of the majority of the parliamentary party. More and more letters of confidence went in. Even though technically he was safe for another year, in reality, that made it clear that he couldn't continue. And then you had the cabinet members, if you remember, going into number 10, telling him that the game was up. So, there are mechanisms which could be deployed to remove Liz Truss, to make it obvious to her that she'd have no option basically other than to resign. However, the difficulty then is, how do you choose her successor? Now, every MP that I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks has said they do not want the Conservative Party members to have a say. One said to me, they messed it up the last time, so we're not letting them near it this time. But there's no obvious way then that you come up with one so-called unity candidate who could then basically negate the need for a ballot of party members. Now, some people have compared it to the situation when Michael Howard took over from Ian Duncan Smith nearly 20 years ago, when he was the only candidate, so there didn't need to be a vote on it. However, he was only wanting to be opposition leader against a very powerful Labour Party, so it wasn't as if there was a lot of people in the running for that job. This is different. You know, you're going to be Prime Minister, so there'll be a lot of people who want to be Prime Minister, even in the current climate, and it's not obvious to me how you would then persuade a lot of them to stand aside for one person.
Yes, it's often remarked upon how Liz Truss only got around a third of the parliamentary party nominating her to get into that final two. But less remarked on is Rishi Sunak only got barely over a third of the party. Penny Mordaunt got under a third of the party. There was no standout leader in the field as there was in 2019 with Boris Johnson or 2017 with Theresa May. Really, really interesting dynamics there in the Tory party. But Kevin Schofield, thank you so much for talking through all of that this morning with us on The Briefing. It's really choppy waters for the Prime Minister. Perhaps just one cabinet resignation could well be the end of Liz Truss. Of course, she's meeting her cabinet this morning, and one of the ministers she will be meeting, of course, is James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister. Now, a little bit earlier on the show, Isabel and Paul spoke to James Heappey himself amid these reports that backbenchers are planning a rebellion against Liz Truss. Let's take a look.
The reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far too fast with the mini budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister and get on with delivering for the country now that she has owned up to and apologised for the mistake that was made with the budget. I don't think that she has abandoned an intent to cut taxes in the way that she envisaged over the summer for good. I think that she has recognised that to try to do all of it in one fiscal event very soon after the start of her premiership, in the context of a very skittish market with the pension funds very highly leveraged against the value of gilts and the borrowing package causing a collapse in confidence in gilts and thus a fall in price that was going to precipitate all sorts of badness in the city. I think that reacting to those economic realities is the leadership that she needed to show. The capping of energy prices for this winter still stands, and that should not be sniffed at. We've gone from a place where the projected average energy bill for the average household was going to be £6,000, and as a consequence of the government's intervention, it's reduced this winter to £2,500. So there is still a very meaningful set of cost of living measures that have been introduced by the government for this winter that still stand. But what I can absolutely guarantee you is that the Conservative Party, as a party, whoever is in charge, will not succeed at the next general election if we spend the next year tearing ourselves to shreds and disagreeing over who should be the leader. We have a leader chosen by our members. We need to get behind her. And if we do, then there is every chance that we can win the next general election, because what nobody is talking about at the moment is that the party that has started to call itself the government in waiting actually has no answers to the current economic circumstance either. They are kidding us that they will neither raise taxes nor cut spending. And that is a completely unsustainable position.
A strong line there, perhaps, from James Heappey, questioning the Labour Party. But of course, it is he who is in the government. And the fundamental destabilising factor here over the last 3 or 4 weeks has been that of economics. So could things have been different? How could things have been different? And was Rishi Sunak really right when he said that tax rises were necessary in the short term? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Andrew Lillico, the Executive Director and Principal of Europe Economics. Andrew, first of all, where we are now is a very peculiar place. Has Liz Truss junked her entire economic strategy?
Absolutely, everything. Every single bit of it seems to have gone, as far as I can see.
When we're looking at the strategy in the round, however, Perhaps the most significant part might have been that supply-side reform. Are you not expecting that to come either now?
Well, I don't think there's any political will for doing any kind of politically difficult or high-risk things, and all of those supply-side reforms were very politically difficult. That's why they've not been enacted in the past. They were difficult things to do. So in these circumstances, it seems to me that she'll have no political strength whatsoever to implement anything hard. So it might be that you find a few cosmetic things and they find a few, small things that look like they can tell a story, that they're still attempting that agenda. But the reality is that anything hard isn't going to happen.
We're in this funny sort of position where I've been looking at all the various parts of the mini-budget and seeing which bits the Conservatives have now reneged on and which bits the Labour Party actually started off supporting. By some measures, perhaps by value, it looks now that the Labour Party supports more elements of the mini-budget than the Conservative Party do. Where are we now in terms of the party that call themselves the government in waiting? Might they actually be a lower tax government than the Conservatives?
Well, it's very hard to guess exactly where things are going to stand, partly because the situation's so fluid, and it's a little bit difficult to criticise the Labour Party for not having a response yet, when the whole situation changed as recently as yesterday. Jeremy Hunt, with his complete reversal of the mini-budget, the biggest thing that he did with that was to circumscribe the energy package. So whereas previously the energy package was going to go on for 2 years and nobody believed it would actually be cancelled after 2 years, because that was immediately before the general election. So we could have had hundreds of billions of pounds of energy price exposure going on indefinitely into the future. We've switched from that now to only the energy package lasting until next April. And given the recent events in bond markets, for all that people say it was politically impossible not to have the energy package, I think that people might think that the political pain of allowing the energy package to expire might be less than the political pain of repeating the kinds of bond market events that we've had over the past couple of weeks. So it seems to me that it is now credible that the energy package will, in fact, come to an end next April, and they'll replace it with something much more credible, much more targeted, much more limited in time. And the consequence of that is that whereas when we were going to have the previous energy package that Kwarteng announced, we were going to have an absolutely enormous fiscal consolidation. He was originally going to do it in November, presumably well over £100 billion of fiscal correction that was going to be needed in order to pay for that, large tax rises, spending cuts and so on.
So Andrew Lillico, is it your assessment, therefore, that the biggest mistake of this government so far wasn't the tax cuts that were proposed in that mini-budget, but were the rather larger spending commitments encompassed within that energy price guarantee?
Well, I think that's very clear. I mean, I was on your show through this summer explaining how Truss, when she was saying there were going to be no energy handouts, what she was going to do instead. So she was saying that she was going to have a plan of doing these short-term tax cuts, and that there were going to be these other economic forces. Obviously, I was completely wrong that was what she was going to do, because as soon as she got elected, she immediately announced, having gone from no energy handouts and got elected on that basis, she announced the mother and father of all energy handouts and subsidies is with this absolutely enormous energy price package. So that completely changed the situation. And of course, she then initially hoped to carry on doing the tax cuts, which she'd announced as well, which created an enormous black hole, which she was going to have to fund after a couple of months. And obviously, markets didn't want to wait, and we are where we are. But that's the fundamental issue. That was always the problem. She needed to circumscribe that in some way if she was to end the market volatility. And as soon as Hunt has announced that really eliminates the vast majority of the problem. The energy package was the reason she had the problem, then curtailing the energy package has been the solution. I don't think they really needed to curtail that much of the rest of it at all, to be honest.
That's a really, really interesting point there. Perhaps politically hard to do, but maybe economically the sensible thing would have been to scale back that energy package in the first place. Let's bring in now our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, to join this conversation. He's been studying the markets. And Liam, first of all, how did the markets respond to yesterday's announcement from the new Chancellor?
Well, in the round, the pound rose slightly and borrowing costs came down.
But I have to say, while that was partly due to Jeremy Hunt reining in some of the government's tax-cutting plans, it was also because of the Bank of England. The Bank of England has decided now is the time to tell journalists and the financial markets that they may not be enacting what they call quantitative tightening. In other words, they may not be trying to sell bonds back to the market at the same time that the government's trying to sell its bonds as it raises money for spending. Some would say, if you were cynical, well, why didn't the Bank of England do that when Truss and Kwarteng needed a bit of reprieve from the pressure from the gnomes of Zurich, if you like? It seems timed as if the Bank of England is very happy with, the Hunt-Sunak view of the world, but isn't particularly happy with the Truss-Kwarteng view of the world. Now, people in the Bank of England would accuse me of being a troublemaker by saying that. I just say that the timing is very fortuitous for the incoming Chancellor and rather galling for the outgoing Chancellor. It's just an observation. Make of it what you will.
And let's throw that to Andrew Lillico as well, because, Andrew, I know that you have been a strident commentator on the issue of interest rates, thinking that the bank has been very, very weak in terms of failing to raise rates earlier. And I know, Liam, you agree on that point as well. Andrew, what could have been different if the bank had acted perhaps in concert with where the government might have wanted them to act?
Well, I think the Bank of England should have raised rates much earlier. It should have been raising them probably towards the back end of last year, and it should have raised them more aggressively, a path more similar to that the Federal Reserve has followed through 2022. But I also think that it was a mistake for them to enact quantitative tightening at the moment that they did. I think that was the wrong way of doing things. If they were going to do the quantitative tightening first, then they probably should have been doing that more last year. But instead, what they've done is they raised rates too slowly, and then once they were accelerating with the raising of the rates, they then introduced quantitative tightening at exactly the wrong moment. I presume part of the reason for that was that they started to worry about their losses which they're making on the QE bonds. Because this is another kind of under-discussed aspect of the fiscal story, is that as interest rates go up, the Bank of England is losing a lot of money on the quantitative easing bonds that it has, and that's adding to the fiscal problem. So the Bank of England might have started to get nervous that if rates went up too much, it was going to lose an enormous amount. And in the context of fiscal loosening, then it might have felt that that was adding to the problem. So it needed to start unloading some of the quantitative easing bonds. But actually, in the particular, the detail of the situation, that was all just a catastrophe. And it seems to me that what we needed was more coordination, more coordinated thinking between what was going on with the Treasury and with the Bank of England. And they, clearly Kwarteng and Bailey didn't get along at all, and that didn't happen in the right way.
Liam Halligan, you're nodding. We only have a minute left on the programme, but if you would, I know it's an enormous question, but once the dust has settled in this particular crisis we're going through, do we need to change the way we think about the Bank of England, perhaps its independence, or just perhaps the way that it talks to the Treasury?
Well, it is a very big question. I should say that Andrew Lillico was one of the few economists, along with myself, who've been warning about the dangers of quantitative easing. For many years, we've been depicted as, way out there and not understanding the situation, and we shouldn't worry our tiny little minds with these things. We've been proven completely right. Quantitative easing is a hugely dangerous, deeply counterproductive policy, and it has been, for many, many years. The emergency measure after the financial crisis became a lifestyle choice. In a nutshell, Tom, the problem isn't that the Bank of England is independent. The problem is that the Bank of England is no longer independent enough. The policy of appointing members to the Monetary Policy Committee, it should be dominated by outsider economists, free-thinking people who aren't constrained by groupthink, people of massive monetary and academic expertise. The trouble is the Treasury has taken over that process. It's full of placemen and women who wouldn't say boo to a goose. That's why the Bank of England has been so way behind the curve. It should have been raising interest rates since early last year and even before. It was clear to anybody who could read financial markets, could read the spreads and the swaps, that inflation was coming big time. Inflation was at a 30-year high way before the war in Ukraine, though that, of course, has exacerbated the situation. We need a more independent Bank of England. We need much more diversity of thought across our policy-making establishment. And look at the committee that Hunt appointed yesterday. All the same Bank of England types, people from BlackRock, and that's mad. We need to get the best possible people involved in our policy making rather than the usual suspects.
And yet it seems that orthodoxy now reigns supreme. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really appreciate the time of both of you. That's it for the show today, but stay with us here on GB News. I'll be with you all the way through until midday, joined throughout by Anaya Falarin Iman. We're here to talk to our reporters across the country, as well as a huge selection of the very best guests on the issues of the day. So that's all to come up in just a few minutes' time. Stick with us as we look at the future of the Prime Minister, as we look at the stability of the country, and indeed, we look at what on earth is going to happen next. That's On to the Point with myself, Anaya Falarin Iman, after the ads.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, radio and online. We're with you until midday with a show jam-packed with today's biggest stories, lots of discussions, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
And I'm sure that the Prime Minister isn't hiding under the desk, no matter what Penny Mordaunt said yesterday. But do get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those right throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Liz Truss is meeting her cabinet this morning after apologising for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. Well, she'll hope that the admission that she went, quote, too far, too fast, will pacify the party. The Prime Minister says she's still committed to growing the economy and has vowed to lead the Tories into the next general election. Well, it comes after the Chancellor reversed the majority of the mini-budget that was published by his predecessor. The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, told us that the Conservatives should now get on with delivering for the country.
Whilst nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted, the reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far, too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m. in January and February. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit, outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe to meet demands. Climate protesters caused traffic disruption this morning, blocking a maid road into West London during rush hour. It was around 30 Just Stop Oil activists who sat on the A4 near Barons Court tube station, blocking both carriageways. Police have now removed the campaigners after some of them glued themselves to the tarmac. Rail workers in the RMT union are voting on whether they should continue strike action for another 6 months. It's over 40,000 union members at Network Rail and 15 train companies who've taken part in nationwide walkouts since June of this year. On some of the strike days, the disruption meant only 20% of services were running across the country and some areas had no trains at all. Well, the ballot to continue industrial action will close on the 15th of November. The actor Kevin Spacey will be cross-examined in a New York court later today after denying sexual abuse claims. Yesterday, the Oscar winner broke down whilst in the witness box, saying he regretted apologising to fellow actor Anthony Rapp for something he says he didn't do. Rapp is suing the star in a civil case alleging unwanted sexual advances were made in 1986 when he was 14 years old. Now, logos on school uniform could be scrapped to make them more affordable as part of a review being launched in Wales. Options being considered include no logo at all or iron-on badges instead that are available free of charge. Well, this could give the families the option to purchase uniform at cheaper costs from a greater variety of retailers. The consultation will run until the end of November. Daniel Craig is set to receive the same honour that's held by his character, James Bond. The 007 actor will be made a Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George for his services to film and theatre. He starred in the last 5 Bond films, including Casino Royale, playing Ian Fleming's iconic title role. Well, the Princess Royal will award the honour at the ceremony at Windsor Castle later this morning. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Tom and Anaya.